After executing 3 people in cold blood, Officer Antoinette Frank calmly asked the survivor hiding in the freezer, "What happened?" The terrified witness replied, "You saw what happened. You killed my brother and sister." March 4, 1995. Eastern New Orleans. A badge meant to protect became a weapon of betrayal. She swore an oath. To serve. To protect. To uphold justice in the streets of New Orleans. Instead, Antoinette Frank became the police officer who murdered a fellow cop and 2 innocent civilians during a restaurant robbery. But this wasn't just another crime. This was the unthinkable. You're working security at a family restaurant. Your partner arrives for the night shift. Someone you trust. Someone wearing the same badge. Someone who took the same oath. And in 60 seconds, that person destroys everything you believed about brotherhood, loyalty, and the thin blue line. The case would become one of the most notorious crimes in modern New Orleans history. Today, she remains the only woman on Louisiana's death row. But here's what will keep you watching. Was Frank a cold-blooded mastermind who manipulated everyone around her? Or was she the pawn in someone else's deadly game? The survivor's words still echo through New Orleans courtrooms 3 decades later. The badge that should have protected became the symbol of ultimate betrayal. And somewhere in this story lies a truth that will challenge everything you think you know about trust, corruption, and the price of justice. What really happened that night at Kim Anh restaurant? And who was truly pulling the strings? March 4, 1995. 1:55 a.m. Eastern New Orleans. The Kim Anh restaurant sat quiet on Bullard Avenue. Closed for business. Empty chairs stacked on tables. The smell of grease and Vietnamese spices lingering in the air. This was supposed to be a sanctuary. A place where the Vu family built their American dream one meal at a time. The Vietnamese couple who owned the restaurant had arrived in the United States just 4 years earlier. They worked 18-hour days. Saved every dollar. Their children helped after-school 17-year-old Quang Vu and his 24-year-old sister Ha Vu washing dishes, taking orders, learning the business that would be their inheritance. But tonight, protection walked through their door. Officer Ronald Williams, 25 years old, stood guard in his blue NOPD uniform. Off-duty security work paid the bills that his police salary couldn't cover. Williams knew the restaurant, knew the family, trusted them. They trusted him. The irony would be written in blood before dawn. At 1:55 a.m., Antoinette Frank stood in the cramped kitchen of Kim Anh, a 9mm pistol clutched in her hand. The woman sworn to protect and serve had become predator. The badge meant to inspire confidence became a weapon of deception. What transforms a protector into a killer? What makes someone cross a line that should never be crossed? The answers lay in the events that followed and in the woman who held that gun. April 30, 1971. New Orleans, Louisiana. Antoinette Renee Frank entered the world in a city where corruption and crime walked hand in hand with justice and order. The daughter of Adam Frank, a Vietnam War veteran struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder. The seeds of destruction were planted before she could walk. As a child at home, Frank dodged booby traps set by her father, Adam Frank, a Vietnam War veteran who suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. He placed shards of wood through floor vents and covered them with rugs to conceal the danger. Home was a battlefield. Safety was an illusion. Trust became a luxury she couldn't afford. But Frank had dreams. Dreams of justice. Dreams of wearing a badge. Dreams of protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. The irony would prove devastating. A girl who survived booby traps at home would become a deadly trap for others. Early 1993. Frank walked into NOPD headquarters with an application and hope. 21 years old. Ready to serve. Ready to make a difference. The city needed officers. Crime was exploding. The ranks were thin. But red flags emerged immediately. According to author Chuck Hustmeyer, Frank was caught lying on several sections of her employment application and failed 2 standard psychiatric evaluations, with psychiatrist Philip Scuria advising against her hiring. 2 psychiatric evaluations. Both failures. A professional recommendation against employment. Warning signs screaming from every page of her file. The New Orleans Police Department ignored them all. Despite this, Frank got a second chance to apply. The NOPD was chronically short-handed. At the time, its officers were paid less than in similarly sized cities. It was losing officers faster than they could be replaced. Desperation breeds poor decisions. The department needed bodies more than it needed standards. Frank became proof that lowering the bar doesn't fill the gap, it creates bigger problems. February 7, 1993. Frank was hired. The woman who failed psychological screening became a sworn officer. The person deemed unfit to carry a badge received one anyway. She graduated from the police academy on February 28, 1993. 21 days. That's how long it took to transform a psychologically unfit applicant into a sworn protector. 3 weeks to give someone who dodged her father's booby traps the authority to set traps of her own. But Frank's performance told a different story. Although Frank graduated near the top of her academy class, her tenure with the NOPD left much to be desired. Her fellow officers thought she was rather shy, had no idea what police work really entailed, and lacked the decisiveness to be a good officer. Top of her class. Bottom of her profession. Academic success couldn't hide practical failure. Frank understood theory but not reality. She memorized procedures but couldn't execute them. At times, they thought Frank veered into irrational behavior. As early as August 1993, Frank's superiors wanted to send her back to the academy for further training. She frequently had to go through supervisory review. 6 months into her career, Frank was already failing. Supervisors questioned her judgment. Colleagues questioned her competence. The warning signs that preceded her hiring continued flashing after she received her badge. Yet somehow, Frank occasionally distinguished herself. On occasion, though, she did distinguish herself, winning Officer of the Month awards from the local Kiwanis Club for her work. The contradiction was jarring. Frank could perform when recognition was at stake but struggled with daily responsibilities. She craved approval but couldn't maintain consistency. Performance became theater rather than genuine service. What drives someone to seek authority they can't handle responsibly? What makes someone chase recognition they don't deserve? The answers lay buried in Frank's troubled childhood and fractured psychology. The girl who dodged her father's traps never learned to avoid setting her own. The woman who sought protection in a badge would use that same badge to destroy protection for others. November 25, 1994. Frank responded to a shooting incident. Rogers LaCaze, a known drug dealer, was one of the suspects. This was the moment. The intersection where Frank's failing career met her future destruction. A routine police call became the beginning of the end. An officer investigating a criminal became a criminal conspiring with her target. The meeting that changed everything. The encounter that transformed Frank from struggling officer to future killer. But that transformation didn't happen overnight. It happened one choice at a time. One compromise at a time. One step at a time down a path that led to 3 corpses and a death sentence. Frank's story wasn't just about individual failure. It was about institutional breakdown. A system that ignored red flags. A department that prioritized quantity over quality. A culture that gave badges to people who should never have received them. The making of Officer Frank was really the unmaking of everything she claimed to represent. The woman who dreamed of protecting others became the person others needed protection from. The child who survived her father's booby traps grew up to set the deadliest trap of all. How does someone transform from victim to predator? How does a person who sought security become someone who destroys it? The answers were written in blood on the floor of Kim Anh restaurant. But the story began decades earlier in a house where a little girl learned that the people who should protect you are sometimes the ones you need to fear most. November 25, 1994. Eastern New Orleans. A gunshot echoed through the night. Blood pooled on asphalt. Another drug deal gone wrong in a city drowning in violence. For most NOPD officers, this was routine. Another shooting, another suspect, another report. For Antoinette Frank, it was destiny. The victim was Rogers LaCaze. 18 years old. Gold teeth gleaming in the streetlight. A known drug dealer who had been shot. Frank arrived to take the report, following protocol, maintaining professional distance. That distance collapsed the moment their eyes met. She was aided by her probable lover, drug dealer Rogers LaCaze. The word probable would haunt courtrooms for years. Was Frank manipulated by love or driven by greed? Did she fall for a criminal or fall into crime? The attraction was immediate. Dangerous. Forbidden. LaCaze represented everything Frank's badge stood against. A street dealer who sold poison to children. A young man who chose bullets over books. A criminal who viewed police as obstacles rather than protectors. Frank saw something different. Maybe she saw rebellion. Maybe she saw excitement. Maybe she saw escape from the structured world of law enforcement. What she found was destruction disguised as desire. LaCaze was 18 when investigators said he and Frank took part in the robbery and triple homicide. 18. A teenager whose life experiences included violence, crime, and survival on New Orleans streets. Frank was 23. 5 years older. A lifetime wiser. Yet somehow, the child became the teacher. The relationship violated every principle of police conduct. Officers don't date known criminals. They don't socialize with drug dealers. They don't compromise investigations by developing personal relationships with suspects. Frank shattered all 3 rules without hesitation. But this wasn't just professional misconduct. This was personal transformation. Frank began changing the moment LaCaze entered her life. The struggling officer who craved approval found validation in criminal circles. The woman who failed psychological evaluations discovered acceptance among people who lived outside society's boundaries. LaCaze didn't just corrupt Frank, he completed her corruption. The timeline remains disputed. An investigator with the Department of Public Safety and Corrections (DOC) believed this was the first contact between the two, although in her statement, Frank claims that they met some time earlier. The truth mattered less than the consequences. Frank's fellow officers noticed changes. She became secretive, defensive, distracted during shifts. The woman who once sought recognition from supervisors began seeking approval from street criminals. The officer who struggled with police work excelled at criminal planning. What transforms someone from protector to predator? What makes a person abandon everything they claim to believe? The answer lived in Frank's relationship with LaCaze. He offered what her police career couldn't: acceptance without judgment, excitement without consequences, power without accountability. But LaCaze demanded payment for his gifts. The young drug dealer wasn't interested in reforming Frank. He was interested in using her. The badge became his shield. The uniform became his disguise. The authority became his weapon. Frank provided access LaCaze could never gain alone. Police officers enter restricted areas. They approach potential victims without suspicion. They carry weapons legally. They operate above suspicion. LaCaze recognized these advantages immediately. The plan began forming in conversations between lovers. Easy money. Quick score. Perfect crime. Frank knew restaurants that kept cash overnight. She knew security routines. She knew which establishments employed off-duty officers for protection. Kim Anh restaurant fit every criterion. Frank had eaten there. She knew the family. She understood their patterns. Most importantly, she knew they trusted police officers completely. That trust would prove fatal. The transformation was complete by March 1995. Frank had evolved from struggling officer to criminal mastermind. The woman who once dreamed of protecting innocent people began planning to rob them. But questions remained unanswered. Rogers LaCaze was a drug dealer and habitual criminal whom Antoinette was trying to guide away from crime. This narrative emerged later: Frank as savior, LaCaze as victim, crime as accident rather than intention. The defense team's version painted Frank as a woman attempting rehabilitation. A police officer trying to save a young man from street life. A relationship built on redemption rather than destruction. Evidence suggested otherwise. Frank didn't reform LaCaze. She joined him. The officer who should have arrested the drug dealer became his accomplice instead. The protector became the predator. How does love become corruption? How does attraction become destruction? The answers lay buried in Frank's psychology and LaCaze's manipulation. Two damaged people found each other at exactly the wrong moment. A failing police officer met a successful criminal. Authority met rebellion. Order met chaos. The collision was inevitable. The destruction was complete. Frank's relationship with LaCaze represented more than individual failure. It symbolized institutional breakdown. A department that hired unfit officers created conditions for catastrophic consequences. A system that ignored warning signs enabled the unthinkable. But individual responsibility remained paramount. Frank made choices. She chose crime over duty. She chose personal desire over professional obligation. She chose Rogers LaCaze over everything her badge represented. Those choices led to Kim Anh restaurant. Those choices led to 3 corpses. Those choices led to death row. The forbidden romance began with attraction and ended with execution. 2 people who should never have met destroyed everything they touched. Love became hate. Protection became predation. Law enforcement became lawlessness. The woman who once investigated Rogers LaCaze became his partner in murder. The officer who took the report on his shooting became his accomplice in killing. The protector who swore to serve innocent people became the person innocent people needed protection from. March 4, 1995. 1:50 a.m. Eastern New Orleans. The Kim Anh restaurant sat dark on Bullard Avenue. Chairs stacked on tables. Cash register counted. Another profitable day completed for the Vu family's American dream. Ronald Austin Williams II sat in his blue NOPD uniform, working security for extra money. 25 years old. Married. Father of 2 young children. A 4-year veteran who joined the force in 1991. Williams represented everything honorable about law enforcement: dedication, integrity, sacrifice for family. He had no idea death was approaching in a familiar uniform. Frank, 23, assigned to the 7th Police District, and her nephew, Rogers LaCaze, 18, entered the Kim Anh restaurant at 4952 Bullard Avenue about 1:50 a.m. The word, nephew, would prove to be another lie. LaCaze wasn't family. He was something far more dangerous. Frank and LaCaze had been at the restaurant twice earlier in the night to get leftover food to eat. Reconnaissance disguised as routine. 2 previous visits to study the layout, count the people, plan the execution. The final visit wasn't for food. As the employees cleaned the closed restaurant, Chow Vu went into the kitchen to count money and entered the dining room of the restaurant to pay Ronald Austin Williams II, 23 years old, the eldest Vu daughter. Working late to help her family's business succeed, she opened the door for familiar faces. Frank's presence meant safety to the Vu family. Police officers protect Vietnamese restaurants. They don't rob them. The uniform guaranteed trust. The badge ensured access. The authority eliminated suspicion. All 3 became weapons of deception. What happened next would destroy more than lives. It would shatter every assumption about protection and predation. Antoinette Frank stood in the cramped kitchen of the Kim Anh restaurant, a 9mm pistol clutched in her hand. The weapon issued to protect innocent life became an instrument of execution. The tool of justice became an agent of murder. 17-year-old Quang Vu knelt on the kitchen floor. An altar boy at St. Bartholomew Catholic Church. A teenager who helped his family after school. A young man whose future ended before it began. 24-year-old Ha Vu knelt beside her brother. A daughter who worked 2 jobs to support her family. A sister who died protecting nothing except the crime of being present. The executions were swift, professional, merciless. Frank didn't hesitate. She didn't negotiate. She didn't show mercy. The woman sworn to protect and serve became predator and destroyer. 2 young lives ended because they witnessed something that couldn't be witnessed. But the worst betrayal was yet to come. Frank and LaCaze bolted through the dining room. On their way to the front door they passed Ronnie Williams. Fellow officer. Colleague. The man who wore the same badge, took the same oath, served the same department. Williams represented everything Frank had abandoned. Honor. Duty. Loyalty. The thin blue line that separates order from chaos. In that moment, Frank chose chaos. The service weapon Frank carried, identical to Williams's own, fired the shots that ended his life. Officer killed by officer. Protector murdered by protector. The ultimate violation of brotherhood, trust, and sacred oath. Why does someone cross the line that should never be crossed? What makes a person destroy everything they claim to represent? The answers died with Ronald Williams on the floor of Kim Anh restaurant. The motive of the murder was robbery. An undetermined amount of cash was taken. Then New Orleans Police Superintendent Richard Pennington said the morning after. But money couldn't explain the magnitude of betrayal. Cash couldn't justify the destruction of trust. Profit couldn't rationalize the murder of innocents. The robbery succeeded. The victims died. The cash disappeared. But one witness survived. Chow Vu, 23 at the time, survived the massacre by hiding in a cooler. Pressed against cold metal walls. Listening to gunshots echo through her family's restaurant. Watching her siblings die. Hearing her dreams shatter. Frank approached the cooler after the executions. What happened? She asked calmly, as if arriving at a crime scene rather than creating one. The question revealed Frank's psychology, a woman so detached from reality that she could commit murder and immediately assume the role of investigating officer. Chow Vu identified Frank as the shooter. You saw what happened. You killed my brother and sister. The words cut through Frank's performance like truth through deception. A survivor confronting her family's killer. Justice speaking to evil. Frank and LaCaze fled into the New Orleans night. They escaped in a battered Toyota, leaving behind 3 corpses and 1 witness whose testimony would prove fatal to their freedom. The transformation was complete. Officer Antoinette Frank, sworn to protect and serve, had become the person citizens needed protection from. The woman who carried a badge became the criminal that badge was designed to stop. But Frank made crucial mistakes that would destroy her carefully constructed lies. She reported her service weapon stolen hours after using it to commit murder. She provided conflicting alibis to investigators. She acted like a victim when evidence proved she was the perpetrator. The night of March 4, 1995, revealed who Antoinette Frank really was beneath the uniform. Not a protector corrupted by circumstance. Not a victim manipulated by love. Not an officer who lost her way. A killer who found her calling. Point 3 families destroyed. One department betrayed. Countless citizens left questioning whether the people sworn to protect them could be trusted. Frank's crimes rippled beyond Kim Anh restaurant into the soul of New Orleans law enforcement. How does a community recover from such betrayal? How do officers continue serving when one of their own commits the unthinkable? The answers would emerge in courtrooms and appellate decisions. But the scars would last forever, carved into survivors' hearts and carved into public trust that might never fully heal. March 4, 1995. 2:30 a.m. Kim Anh restaurant. Red and blue lights painted the night in emergency colors. Crime scene tape fluttered in the humid New Orleans breeze. Yellow markers numbered each piece of evidence. 3 body bags waited for transport to the morgue. Detective Eddie Rance arrived expecting another drug deal gone wrong. Another robbery turned deadly. Another night in a city where violence was currency and death was commonplace. He found something worse. Officer Ronald Williams lay dead in his uniform. Badge still pinned to his chest. Service weapon still holstered at his side. The thin blue line had been crossed in the most unthinkable way. Cop killed by cop. But detectives didn't know that yet. The initial investigation focused on external threats. Gang members. Drug dealers. Criminals with grudges against police officers. The possibility that another NOPD officer committed the murders seemed impossible. Impossible until Chow Vu gave her statement that I saw a police officer shoot my brother and sister, she told investigators through tears. The words hit the detective unit like a physical blow. Police officers don't execute innocent families during robberies. They prevent such executions, except when they don't. The witness description matched dozens of NOPD officers. Male, female, black, white, young. Narrowing the suspect pool required more than physical appearance. It required understanding who had access, opportunity, and motive. That's when Frank made her first crucial mistake. March 4, 1995. 8 a.m. NOPD headquarters. Frank walked into the station 4 hours after committing triple murder. She looked composed, professional, ready for another shift protecting and serving the citizens of New Orleans. She filed a report claiming her service weapon had been stolen from her car. The timing was mathematically impossible. The coincidence was legally fatal. The same weapon used to kill Williams hours earlier was now reported stolen by its registered owner. Detectives recognized the pattern immediately. Criminals often report weapons stolen after using them in crimes. The tactic creates distance between owner and weapon, suspect and evidence, criminal and consequence. Frank believed the strategy would protect her. Instead, it exposed her. Evidence doesn't lie, and Frank's web of deception began crumbling within hours. Ballistics confirmed the weapon used to kill Williams was registered to Frank. Forensics placed her at Kim Anh during the murders. Witness testimony identified her as the shooter. But Frank had one more card to play. Shortly after the survivors called police, Frank returned to the scene in a patrol car. She arrived as backup. Responded as an officer. Acted as if she belonged there. The audacity was breathtaking. The killer returning to investigate her own crime. The perpetrator pretending to solve her own murders. The predator disguised as protector. Frank walked through Kim Anh restaurant examining evidence she had created. She consoled survivors she had traumatized. She promised justice to families she had destroyed. What drives someone to return to their crime scene? What makes a killer want to watch the investigation unfold? The answers revealed Frank's psychology, a woman so detached from reality that she could commit murder and immediately assume the role of investigating officer. Someone who viewed crime scenes as theater rather than tragedy. But the performance contained fatal flaws. Frank's behavior at Kim Anh raised suspicions among seasoned detectives. She asked too many questions about evidence. She seemed too interested in witness statements. She displayed too much knowledge about details that shouldn't have been available to responding officers. Most damaging of all, she contradicted her own stolen weapon report. While examining the crime scene, Frank discussed the murder weapon with other officers. She described details about her service pistol that didn't match her stolen property report. The weapon she claimed was taken from her car became the weapon she intimately knew at the crime scene. The contradiction was obvious to investigators. The lie was legally fatal. March 7, 1995. Frank was arrested. The NOPD was investigating the murder of one of their own, never suspecting the killer wore their badge. 3 days after triple murder, the unthinkable became undeniable. Officer Antoinette. Frank was the perpetrator, not the protector. The arrest sent shockwaves through NOPD. Police officers don't kill fellow officers. They don't execute innocent families. They don't cross lines that separate civilization from chaos. Except Frank did all three. LaCaze was arrested shortly after Frank. The 18-year-old drug dealer had believed Frank's badge provided protection from consequences. Instead, it guaranteed prosecution for capital murder. The evidence was overwhelming. Physical proof, eyewitness testimony, contradictory statements, documented lies. Frank's attempts to cover her tracks had created a paper trail that led directly to death row. But questions remained unanswered. How does a police department prevent such betrayal? How do supervisors identify officers who might cross unthinkable lines? What warning signs were missed, ignored, or dismissed? The investigation revealed institutional failures at every level. Frank's psychological evaluations had predicted this outcome. Her academy performance had suggested unfitness for duty. Her street behavior had raised concerns among colleagues. Yet she remained on patrol until 3 people died. Frank's case forced uncomfortable questions about police recruitment, training, and oversight. The woman who should have been rejected during hiring became the officer who murdered fellow officers during duty. The investigation exposed more than individual criminality. It revealed systemic breakdown that enabled the unthinkable. September 1995. Orleans Parish Criminal Court. 8 months after triple murder, Antoinette Frank faced the justice system she had sworn to serve. The defendant's chair replaced the patrol car. Prison clothes replaced the police uniform. The authority she once wielded became powerless against overwhelming evidence. Frank's trial began with a single question echoing through the courtroom. How does a protector become a predator? The prosecution had built an ironclad case. Ballistics evidence, eyewitness testimony, contradictory statements, physical proof that Frank's service weapon killed Williams, documentation that she filed false stolen property reports, testimony that she returned to the crime scene pretending innocence. But the most damaging evidence came from survivor Chow Vu. You saw what happened. You killed my brother and sister. The words cut through Frank's denials like truth through deception. A sister confronting her sibling's killer. Justice speaking to evil in the most personal way possible. Frank's defense team attempted multiple strategies. They blamed LaCaze for the murders. They questioned evidence handling procedures. They suggested Frank was manipulated rather than murderous. They painted her as victim rather than perpetrator. None of it worked. The evidence was overwhelming. The testimony was devastating. The lies were obvious. Frank had transformed from struggling officer to cold-blooded killer, and 12 jurors recognized the truth immediately. A jury took less than 30 minutes to convict her and less than an hour to sentence her to death. 30 minutes. Half an hour to weigh evidence, consider testimony, and reach a verdict that would echo through Louisiana's criminal justice system for decades. The speed revealed the strength of the prosecution's case and the weakness of Frank's defense. October 20, 1995. Frank received her death sentence. Justice swift. Justice certain. Justice final. The woman who once carried a badge became the person that badge was designed to stop. The officer who swore to protect innocent life became the killer who destroyed it. The protector became predator in less than 2 years on the force. But Frank's case was only half the story. Rogers LaCaze faced trial separately. The 18-year-old drug dealer who corrupted a police officer found himself facing capital charges for capital crimes. Following a 5-day bifurcated trial in July of 1995, the defendant was found guilty as charged. Jurors thereafter unanimously recommended imposition of the death penalty on each of 3 counts. 2 death sentences. 2 killers. 1 unthinkable crime. Yet something was different about their fates. Rogers LaCaze was re-sentenced Friday to life without parole. He was previously on death row on capital murder convictions in a 1995 triple murder. The mastermind of the murders would live while his accomplice faced execution. The irony was devastating. Frank, who wore the badge, received death. LaCaze, who corrupted the badge, received life. The system that should have treated them equally created inequality that haunted both cases for decades. Frank became the only woman on Louisiana's death row. Alone among female inmates. Alone among corrupt officers. Alone among those who betrayed everything law enforcement represents. The impact on NOPD was immediate and catastrophic. Officers who once trusted colleagues questioned everyone around them. Citizens who relied on police protection wondered if their protectors might become predators. The thin blue line that separates order from chaos had been crossed by someone wearing blue. How does a police department recover from such betrayal? How do officers continue serving when one of their own commits the unthinkable? The answers emerged slowly, painfully, through policy changes and personnel reforms designed to prevent another Antoinette Frank. Psychological evaluations became more rigorous. Background checks became more thorough. Warning signs became harder to ignore. But scars remained. Frank's conviction sent ripples through law enforcement communities nationwide. Police academies added ethics training. Departments implemented stronger oversight procedures. Citizens demanded accountability from officers who claimed authority over their lives. The trial revealed more than individual criminality. It exposed systemic failures that enabled the unthinkable. Frank's case forced uncomfortable questions about police recruitment, training, and oversight. 2 psychiatric evaluations had failed her. A psychiatrist had advised against her hiring. Academy instructors had questioned her fitness for duty. Street supervisors had documented performance problems. Yet she remained on patrol until 3 people died. The verdict provided closure for families but couldn't restore what was lost. Ronald Williams would never return to his wife and children. Quang and Ha Vu would never fulfill their dreams. Chow Vu would never feel completely safe again. Frank's death sentence satisfied justice but couldn't resurrect the dead. The swift trial and swifter conviction demonstrated that justice can move quickly when evidence is overwhelming. But it also revealed the price of institutional failure: lives lost because warning signs were ignored, standards were lowered, and unfit officers received badges they should never have carried. What lessons emerge from such tragedy? What changes prevent future betrayals? The answers lay buried in policy manuals and training procedures, but the fundamental truth remained unchanged. Badges don't create character, they only reveal what was already there. March 2025. Nearly 30 years after triple murder. Antoinette Frank sits in her cell at Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women in St. Gabriel. The only woman on Louisiana's death row. Alone among 56 condemned inmates. The last person standing between life and execution for crimes that shocked a city and betrayed everything law enforcement represents. The appeals have been exhausted. The clemency hearings denied. The legal options eliminated one by one until only execution remains. October 13, 2023. Frank's final chance at mercy was rejected by Louisiana's Board of Pardons and Committee on Parole. The decision was swift, final, unforgiving as the murders that brought her to this moment. But Frank's fate became intertwined with larger political forces reshaping Louisiana's approach to capital punishment. February 10, 2025. Governor Jeff Landry announced Louisiana's decision to resume executions after a 15-year pause. The Louisiana Department of Public Safety and Corrections finalized protocols allowing death sentences to be carried out using nitrogen hypoxia, a new method designed to overcome drug shortages that had stalled executions nationwide. The announcement sent shockwaves through death row. Frank and 55 other condemned inmates suddenly faced the possibility of execution after years of legal limbo. The machinery of death was operational again, and their cases moved from theoretical to imminent. March 18, 2025. Louisiana conducted its first execution in 15 years. Jesse Hoffman Jr. died by nitrogen gas at Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola. The first person executed with this method in Louisiana history. The precedent that would clear the path for future executions, including potentially Frank's own. The resumption of executions changed everything for death row inmates. What had been distant theoretical possibility became immediate concrete reality. Appeals that once delayed executions for decades now faced expedited review. Clemency that once offered hope now seemed increasingly unlikely. Frank's case gained renewed attention as advocates argued that executing her while co-defendant Rogers LaCaze serves life imprisonment created fundamental inequity. LaCaze, originally sentenced to death, had his sentence reduced to life without parole in 2019. The mastermind lives while the accomplice faces execution. But courts remained unmoved by arguments about disparity. Frank's conviction stood. Her sentence remained unchanged. Her execution date awaited scheduling. The woman who once investigated crimes became the criminal awaiting ultimate punishment. How does someone transform from protector to predator? How does a person sworn to serve others become someone others need protection from? The questions that began Frank's story remain unanswered 3 decades later. The girl who dodged her father's booby traps grew up to set the deadliest trap of all. The officer who struggled with police work excelled at planning murder. The protector became predator in less than 2 years on the force. Frank's legacy extends beyond individual criminality. Her case forced institutional changes in police recruitment, psychological evaluation, and oversight procedures. The woman who should have been rejected during hiring became the reason departments nationwide strengthened screening processes. But questions persist about systemic failures that enabled the unthinkable. Point 2 Psychiatric evaluations failed her. A psychiatrist advised against her hiring. Academy instructors questioned her fitness. Street supervisors documented performance problems. Yet she remained on patrol until 3 people died. Frank's story isn't just about one corrupt officer, it's about institutional breakdown that ignores warning signs, lowers standards, and gives badges to people who should never receive them. The Vu family survivors continue living with scars that will never heal. Chow Vu built a new life but carries memories no one should bear. The woman who hid in a freezer while her siblings were executed still jumps at unexpected sounds, still questions whether safety is possible, still wonders if justice was truly served. Officer Ronald Williams's widow raised their children alone, answering questions about why daddy never came home, explaining how someone he trusted became someone who killed him, managing grief that multiplies rather than diminishes with time. Frank's crimes created ripples of destruction that spread far beyond Kim. On restaurant. Families destroyed. Trust shattered. Faith in institutions damaged. The thin blue line crossed by someone wearing blue.A. Louisiana prepares to resume regular executions. Frank's case represents more than individual justice, it symbolizes the price of betrayal and the cost of institutional failure. Evil can hide behind authority. Corruption can wear a badge. Predators can disguise themselves as protectors. The only defense against such betrayal is vigilance, recognition that badges don't create character. They only reveal what was already there. Frank's execution, when it comes, will close a chapter but not answer fundamental questions about how protectors become predators. Those answers lie buried in psychology too complex for courtrooms, motivations too dark for understanding, and character flaws too deep for redemption. The woman who dreamed of justice will receive it administered by the system she betrayed, carried out by the state she served, witnessed by the community she terrorized. What drove Officer Frank to cross lines that should never be crossed? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe for more deep investigations into cases that changed American law enforcement forever. Hit the notification bell because some stories demand to be told, and some lessons must never be forgotten. Next week, the case that exposed corruption in an entire police department. The scandal that reached the highest levels of law enforcement. The investigation that proved sometimes the system itself becomes the criminal. The badge was supposed to protect. Instead, it became the weapon that destroyed everything it claimed to defend.